So we turn gently now to the subject matter for our Dhamma talk today. And last time I saw you was actually not last Tuesday, but the Tuesday before, and I made a start on the subject of the blessing of cherishing your own children. And it comes as part of a series of values and blessings which are listed in the Buddhist scriptures as a sort of progression, starting with simple virtues and values and moving towards more transcendental or esoteric ones. And the idea of these values and virtues is that wherever you jump in on the staircase, then the next step up will always be a step more advanced. So wherever you start, it will lead you further on that spiritual path. And at the moment I'm talking about a lot of values that pertain to harmony in a family life. And really what it's saying is that even making a success of life within your family is also a spiritual blessing, which leads to yet more advanced and esoteric values. So don't look down on the family life as being the opposite of a spiritual life. It's actually a place where many spiritual values can be cultivated. And as usual, these talks come in halves, and the half which I have already talked about concerning the upbringing of children talked mainly about the care which parents need to have for the formation of a moral conscience in their children, to avoid letting your children do things which are bad or damaging, while encouraging them to do things which are good and beneficial in their lives. And I think the upshot of most of what I said last time was that although you can encourage your children until you're blue in the face by telling them what you want them to do, but really the thing which speaks louder than words is the example you set for them. And often you have to be the change you want to see in your children. Otherwise, you shouldn't be surprised if your children pick up all your worst habits. So today I will take this a little bit further, and I'll talk a little bit further about some of the other things which children ought to be able to expect in terms of upbringing from their parents, and also to talk about some of the special obstacles which parents come up again in this day and age, which may be over and above the things which we see in the scriptural times. So today I'm going to talk about responsibility of parents for their children's education. And this is again one of the things which the Buddha charged parents with, not necessarily to educate the children themselves, but to see that their children are properly educated. And as we shall see, this means both in vocational subjects but also in spiritual subjects. It's one of the major duties of care of a parent towards their child. So often this entails being a little bit choosy about the books and entertainment which children choose. And it may not be a case necessarily of choosing these things for your children, but once they go to the bookshop to get new books or choose their own materials to entertain themselves with, then we should remain observant about their choices, perhaps from a distance, and we might be able to help steer them in the way they decide about things, in a way that's going to be ultimately more beneficial for them. So whether they want to read graphic novels or short stories or Shakespeare or even algebra, we would find it helpful to read alongside them. And as they grow up, then the healthy patterns of choice that we help them with will gradually start to take root more and more, whether it be in terms of the quality of the books or the music or the entertainment, things that will support their cultural growth. At the same time, we may need to seek out good teachers. I think I have already mentioned moving into an area with a decent school, but it may also mean things like taking your children to study with specialists in subjects like music or sport from an early age. And most parents are supportive of their children's education, but others go to the extreme of having expectations which are too high. So we need to take the attitude instead that deep down every child has a talent for something, they have a gift, and that talent might not necessarily be an academic one, but they should be given the extracurricular opportunities to explore all sorts of things, whether it be athletics or music, art, public speaking, whatever, to discover what that talent is, what is their superpower. And all the child essentially needs to do is to find something within the realm of at least artful knowledge and craftsmanship that they are particularly good at, that they're better than the next person at. So there's no need to send them to some sort of Russell Group university just because it's fashionable or because a member of the family went there. It makes more sense to try to find a specialism that matches what the child is actually good at and where their true interests lie. What I found myself from most subjects is that unless you enjoy it, it's very hard to see it through to completion. So sometimes just because a particular subject is useful or well regarded doesn't replace the fact that you enjoy doing it enough to see it through to go the extra mile in your studies. So that's really what counts, I would say. As for the spiritual side of things, got a slide there. Of course, vocational knowledge is not the whole story. Life is more than food on your table, and body and spirit ideally need to go hand in hand. When it comes to spiritual education, these days, although we have great things like religious education, it would be a mistake to leave responsibility for spiritual education up to school teachers, because in many countries, especially places like the United States and France, the state school system is no longer authorized to advocate a particular religious view anymore. So parents are expected to take the initiative in teaching their children the sort of spiritual values they want to see. And if we want our children to have a special place in their hearts for, let's say, Buddhism, then we either have to make sure we're knowledgeable enough to actually make Buddhism interesting to the children, or at least seek out spiritual mentors who can do the job for us. As an approximate guide, and if you might look at yourself and see whether you have got these things yet, there are some essential aspects to Buddhist spiritual knowledge on a child sort of level, which would include things like having respect for parents, a basic familiarity with Dhamma literature. So what we've studied on these blessings of life so far, especially the first 6 blessings, would be a good place to start. They would need to know what nirvana is, at least as a goal to work towards. Things like the 4 virtues of the householder. I think you heard about that in a previous talk from the Venerable Ronapop. Truthfulness, training oneself without end, patience and self-sacrifice, learning how to support the Buddhist community, and having the regular opportunity to practice generosity, chanting, meditation, or will give a valuable foundation of discretion, so that in the future, on the basis of that, they can continue to take sensible decisions about their lives, even when they're away from the parents' watchful eye. In a more Asian context, then the Buddha did give yet more advice than this. Actually, the fourth of the duties which the Buddha charged parents with was to arrange their children's marriage. That will come back to the whole issue of marriage in the next blessing. But in this day and age, in many places, arranged marriages per se are no longer legal. But the gist of what the Buddha really advised parents was that they should be involved in the child's marriage choices. It boils down to the expectation also that the parents will finance their children's marriage and offer guidance from their accumulated experience of a likely choice of spouse. So that's what it would be. Yeah? Choice of marriage partner was traditionally taken quite seriously because it was considered the joining together of two whole families. And generally young people who are in love or in lust or whatever tend to see the world through rather rose-tinted spectacles. So it's the tradition, even in the present day and even in the West, of introducing one's prospective fiancé to one's parents if one is serious about them. So I mentioned this in passing. So also passing on one's legacy or inheritance to one's children. This is the fifth one of the 5 duties which the Buddha charged parents with. Generally goes hand in hand with the expectation that children will be involved in the care of their parents long into adulthood. So it's not like they get the age of 16 and sort of disappear off the face of the earth, but they would be still around and in their parents' life beyond that. That's the expectation, which goes generally together with this idea of passing on one's legacy to one's children, at least financial inheritance. Yeah? So I mentioned that in passing. You'd be right if you think I mentioned a lot of things that make parenthood sound like quite a lot of work, but in the present day and age, there are many things which have added to this workload. More threats lurking in the environment which our children inhabit, and some are particular minefields for children, parents bringing up their children. And I'm not just talking about money matters, but also the availability of various sorts of entertainment and the darker influence of the internet. So when talking about money, you might assume I'm going to talk about how much it costs to bring up children, but what I was actually intending to talk about is more like passing on a common sense to children concerning their finances. Any child who is able to balance the books for their own personal finances will, to some extent, be future-proofed. So as a parent, we can encourage financial common sense in children by teaching them to put aside a little money each week, so learning to save money, and to be frugal in their spending. If children come asking us for money, then they should be able to justify the expense to you. And if they lack a good reason, then you shouldn't give them the money. Yeah? And you should let them know why. Even if they're unhappy, then we should stand firm on that. And they have to understand the consequences of overspending instead of like easy come, easy go. And we shouldn't use money, let's say, to bribe them to stop crying or to get them out of the house. And you shouldn't let them think that money grows on trees, but you should remind them that the money that you earn is comes through considerable hardship and sacrifice on your part. Sometimes you can give them pocket money, and that is often quite a good way out, because it would be even better if they actually earn their pocket money as well, to learn the things about responsibility, which I mentioned in the first half of this lecture. If they can do things like chores around the house or odd jobs suitable to their age, like dog walking or paper rounds or babysitting, then they will have a sense of valuing the money which they can then use. If we are teaching them to be frugal, then when they are buying things, we should teach them first to window shop and then size up prices versus quality before settling for an item of appropriate value. And we need to find a way to explain to them that good things do not necessarily cost more. They should learn to look for the true value of things rather than being mesmerized by, let's say, designer brand names. They should learn how to look after things which they own or which they have borrowed without damaging them. And it would also be useful to train them to do simple repairs to damaged items, such as, let's say, sewing buttons back onto their clothes. And if items are surplus to their needs, then they should be given to charity. If they are broken beyond repair, then they should be recycled properly. If children make their own toys, or let's say assemble them from a kit, they would generally value them more than if they're just given them. And things like piggy banks are an easy and a fun way to save what is left over from their allowance or pocket money. Sometimes we might take them to the bank to open up their own savings account. And we can encourage them to deposit any money they get on special occasions, like, say, birthdays or holidays, for their own future education fund. So we're encouraging them to save money instead of spending it all. And we should also encourage them to have friends who have similar habits. Second one, major concern facing parents today would be not having enough time to spend with their children. And some might think that a good shortcut to this, if they don't have enough time to hang out with their kids, is to allow their children to spend more time watching TV and letting the TV babysit their kids. Unfortunately, excessive amounts of entertainment or age-inappropriate media might prematurely make children more aggressive or sexualized, or teach them swear words, and they will become sort of unwilling puppets to popular culture and commercialism. So TV is useful, but only in as far as it is educational. So rather than just watching the TV indiscriminately, they ought to be house rules for the quality of content and also length of time spent watching it. TV shouldn't not be allowed to interfere with schoolwork or household chores, for example. Kids shouldn't get to watch TV whenever they want, but there should be a set time for homework, reviewing lessons, reading, and helping with chores. And they should never get to watch TV until late at night. Otherwise, it'll interfere with their sleep patterns, and that is also important for their academic performance especially. The TV they do watch ought to promote healthy values. So let's say documentaries or things to do with their schoolwork, things that where they can learn more about their country or their culture or their own background, and things with virtuous role models as well. These days, I don't know if people still gather around the TV as a family to watch it anymore. Yes? Not really, okay. My impression is that everyone's got a TV in their own room these days, where you're basically on a losing hand if you their whole life, but it is part of a life which fits in with other things like enough sleep, chores, meditation, homework, and a well-defined view of educational media, which will lead to a brighter future. That's not the whole of it, and money, entertainment, internet may seem like major problems, but they are eclipsed completely if children go one step further down the road of substance abuse. If you spoil children to conceal embarrassment in the family, spoiling children often leads to neglect of their emotional and spiritual growth. And spoiled children, although it may be hard to discipline them at times, may lead to them being even more unhappy in the long term because they suffer when they cannot always get what they want. And a lack of self-control can spiral into other things which are more serious, whether it be drugs, drinking, alcohol, or otherwise behaving in an outrageous way. So prevention is better than cure when it comes to children going down a path of self-destructive behavior. And in this respect, we mustn't forget our role as a teacher to our children, person who's with them for the most hours of their day, probably, in order to demonstrate as well as teach right and wrong behaviors concerning self-discipline. If there are signs that something is going wrong, then we need to deal with the problem immediately, even though it might be hard for us to do so. We need to let them know that we are concerned about them, and if they understand that our concern comes from our sense of love for them and a sense of love that they may have betrayed, then often they can make the right choice without any further intervention. Because sometimes children don't realize that they're not just hurting themselves, but they're also hurting us as well as the person who loves them. But if the family is already in crisis, then while remembering that we have love for them, but we must also realize that it might not be enough, that love needs to be tempered by reason and understanding, and possibly outside help as well if the parent is overwhelmed. But we need to have faith that that love can shine through eventually, given all the other factors which we can draw upon as well. In terms of the subject of rehab, and hopefully it won't come to that point, but if it ever does, there is a blessing a little bit further down the series, number 20, on not drinking intoxicants. But while on the subject of damage control and possible different approaches to this, most of the Western style of rehab for young people is really tough, often relies on things like synthetic opiates for the pain relief during withdrawal. And young people are very much down to their own personal resolve to see rehab through to completion. In Asia, by contrast, it's not that they just let children get away with it, because there's still quite widespread the problem of addiction in Asian societies. But often they can draw a lot more on the sense of social capital, especially love, and the sense of warmth and harmony in the family life can really be a resource which children can fall back on a lot more than maybe they can in a Western society. So leveraging the family is something which is done a lot more in the Asian context for things like rehabilitation of children who have become addicts. And one example of this, which has gained quite a lot of international renown in recent years, is that of a particular temple in Thailand known as Wat Tham Kabok in Saraburi province, where the children get sort of enrolled in a temple lifestyle in order to help shake themselves free of addiction. And they have to go into that voluntarily, and while they are living in this sort of community to overcome their addiction, then they engage with spiritual resources such as resilience. This picture is of them taking a vow together each morning not to give in to their urges, and it also bolsters respect. They are visited each day by their school friends as a reminder of how selfish their behavior is and damaging to the wider society. And that encourages the sense of gratitude, something that they can leverage to overcome their own sort of selfish or egotistical urges. And the parents who give them support throughout the course of their rehabilitation. What actually happens, I should add, is that monks administer some sort of emetic herbal thing, and then they throw up every day and clear out their physical system completely. And they even got some, I think there were Danish kids got put into this scheme as well to see whether that was a more gentle approach to their addictions, and they seem to recommend it. Boys and girls, I should say. So these are some of the ways which Buddhism has a little bit of an input to even the style of rehabilitation for children who need to have damage control for their addiction to intoxicants of various sorts. So I'll finish off with a story today. My intention, as I said at the beginning, is not to put you off having a family completely. So I will finish off with a little bit of a story of redemption about parenting, which today comes from a Dhammapada commentary about someone who you may have heard of before, called Anāthapindika. Ring any bells? Wealthy supporter of the Buddha, close supporter of the Buddha. Even though he was wealthy, it didn't mean that he didn't have problems in his family life. And he had one son called Kala, who always stayed away or hid or whatever whenever the Buddha or any monks came round the house to see Anāthapindika. And his father, Anāthapindika, was afraid that if he kept on behaving in that way, then he would end up with bad habits and lack spiritual wisdom. So he enticed his son to do good deeds with the promise of money, and an approach which in Buddhism is known as skillful means. So what may not immediately appear to be skillful in the long term leads to something better coming out of it. So he promised his son 100 gahapanas, the currency at the time, if the young man, Kala, consented to go to the monastery and keep the precepts for just one day. So he basically bribed his son to go to the temple. Skillful means. So the son went to the temple, and he duly curled up under a tree and went to sleep. And when he woke up again, he didn't hear any teaching, and he went straight home again with his hand out, waiting for his reward. So he got his 100 gahapanas, and that came together with a new proposal from his father, this time a bigger bribe, if he would go to the temple, and this time not just go there, but also listen to a sermon and remember at least one teaching well enough to come back and tell his father about it when he got home. So if he could remember more than one teaching, then he would get more money. So at the outset, Kala was only interested in money. But later, as he actually tried to get his head around the teachings he was hearing from the monks, he started to absorb some of this into his heart and into his mind. And one day the Buddha himself was giving a teaching, and he could see that Kala was in the audience. And he could see that Kala was starting to have slightly more of an interest in the Dharma, an interest which was more authentic. So on that day, the Buddha started to teach on a really complicated, elaborate subject, so that Kala had to concentrate really carefully in order to make head or tail of it at all. And as a result of all his effort to concentrate, that day Kala was able to attain a stage of enlightenment known as stream entry, which is something that once you attain it, you don't lose it anymore. And that day when he went home to his father said, "Oh, see, you've come back from the temple, no mention of money this time." And the father offered him the money, the prize for going to the temple, and he said he didn't want it because he had already gained something worth much more than that. Something which had value beyond comparison. So this is a story of some of the unusual lengths which some parents go to in order to ensure their children grow up with the blessing of spiritual wisdom. So in conclusion, for children, you need to love your children without spoiling them, and you should never love them so much you can't bear to punish them. But as we said, punishment might be withdrawal of rewards. You need to be a teacher to your child, since a parent has many roles to play. You need to be lenient but not over fussy while making time for your children. If you have to scold them, try to do so without losing your temper, and whether it's praise or criticism, try to do it while the incident is still fresh in the child's mind. You need to train children to take responsibility for appropriate household chores from an early age, and don't forget that material support for any child is not enough, that they need to learn spiritual knowledge as well. If you enjoyed meditation today, my advice is that you should try to practice a little every day, and remember the technique which you learned today and practice it at home too, maybe at a time of the day when it is convenient for you, for 20 minutes. So it might be first thing in the morning, might be last thing at night, but if you practice for 20 minutes each day, then you start to find that it becomes easier, and that you can go further in the time that you have allotted yourself. And if you want to increase the length of time, then you can do that once you have that 20 minutes settled into place in your daily routine. In this respect, some people find they can't remember how to meditate after a while, and you can download an app known as MindGem onto your mobile phone, and that will give you audio tracks for free that you can follow along with as you meditate, and set a timer as well. Here in the Working Temple, there are classes every Tuesday and Thursday evening, which is sometimes a useful source of inspiration, because often if you meditate all on your own at home, then give it 7 days and the tendency to laziness will start to creep in a way that you probably won't be able to keep the practice going quite so easily. So being able to come along for a regular weekly class of some sort is a good way to boost your inspiration to do that. The Tuesday evening classes generally have a slightly shorter meditation, a slightly more ecumenical or Dhamma light subject matter. On Thursday it's a longer 45-minute meditation, and the topics go more into introductory Buddhism. Apart from that, online on every Saturday between 7 and 8 British time, we have an online meditation and teaching which you can tune into via the Zoom channel number you can see there. And coming up on the 15th of May, we have a full moon event which coincides this month with the Buddha's birthday, or Vesak Day. And apart from being online, you can also attend in person, and I would encourage you to do that, because we have representatives from all the different denominations of Buddhism coming along as well to celebrate with us. Instead of each one being to their own temple, we're trying to do the Buddhist harmony bit, and we're also inviting the mayor and the head of clinical psychology at Signet to give little speeches as well. And there's a candlelit circumambulation event as well. So it's the first time we've organized that here, but we hope it will be something that brings together a lot of people from different walks of society. In June, for those looking for something longer in the terms of meditation, young men may join a retreat where you can get to try out being a monk for 2 weeks or a whole month if you like, during the month of June. And this will be held in Denmark this time. It's 2 years since we were able to last organize this, so we are gradually recovering it. This activity again, we have 6 signed up so far, 2 from Britain, so it's looking good so far. The next weekend retreat will be between the 8th and 10th of July, and I believe we are now in the final stages of negotiation for a retreat center called the Open Pathway Retreat Center, somewhere near Yeovil in Somerset. So we get a little bit of a change of scene from here to get down into the West Country for some real nature. Yes. So that's all I would like to share with you for today, but if there are any questions, comments, feedback at this point, I'd be very happy to hear from you.
Do you do any teachings on like emptiness and anatta and things like that?
Those are teachings which are Buddhist teachings also, but they are difficult teachings to understand intellectually. So generally, I would like to say we tend to avoid them because people just come along for the sort of philosophical aspect of it, and it doesn't really connect with practice. But saying that, if you meditate deeply, then you can start to explore those things for yourself in a way that is meaningful. Towards the end of this series, I do give a little bit more of a talk on things like nirvana, which again you could say is a little bit intellectual out there, but hopefully by that time in the series of blessings it will make more sense. Yes.